Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. We are heading into the home stretch. It seems the polls are tightening just a little bit in terms of the views. Mr. Carney still has very high positives, but actually people are now seeming to distinguish when it comes to economic issues between the problems Trump is creating and the problems that are domestic here at home that we've been dealing with for a long time. So where do we go to sort all of this out? To our friend Darrell Bricker, who is in charge of Ipsos in the whole world, which is what I said last time. It's not true. But
it's not actually true. I'm responsible for public affairs, which is the biggest service line at Ipsos. We're in 44 countries with around 1,500 people. But no, there's Ben Page runs the whole thing. Yeah.
I was just kind of teasing because I made that error last time, so I won't do it again. Okay, so what are you seeing? That there's actually some tightening of the polls? If so, why and how? Tell us what you're seeing.
Well, there has been a tightening. So we had the Liberals ahead by 12 last week. They're now ahead by 6. Mm-hmm. So half of what it was.
Yeah.
And really what seems to be happening is it's just about Canadians' focus. So this is a leadership election. And so it's the leader best oriented to deal with a specific set of issues. So if you're focused on Trump and the United States, Mark Carney is your person. And he has been relentless in making the point that he is the best person to deal with this issue. So if that's your most important issue and it's the top issue in the campaign, the Liberals are going to do well. Then on cost of living and change, that's where Pierre Poilievre dominates. So if that comes up as the most important issue, then the Conservatives do better. What we saw over the course of the last week is Donald Trump has tamped down his rhetoric around specifically Canada. Yeah. People have kind of drifted away a bit from that, and they've gone back to the issues that existed prior to the start of the election campaign, which were basically cost of living. And on those issues, the Conservatives do better. So what you're seeing is really interesting, Senator. They kind of link together.
Yeah, so that's the question.
Yeah. So as you see Trump and trade drop down the list and you see cost of living move up the list, which is what we've seen over the last few days, then you see best prime minister move. And then you also see how you're going to vote move. So that's what's happened. They're working in lockstep.
So the Conservatives, according to your numbers, now lead as best party to deal with economic issues. But the voters are starting to make a distinction between economic issues, for example, Trump trade and what that means and everything that he's doing to our economy, allegedly, and then the distinction about all of the things that were going on here already, the problems we had. So the voters are now changing their position.
Yeah, well, they're changing their focus.
Yeah. Okay.
So they're still concerned about Donald Trump, but not as concerned as they were when he was talking about Canada becoming the 51st state and calling Justin Trudeau Prime Minister or Governor Trudeau. And what he was exactly going to do was being anticipated rather than delivered. That was when it was, interestingly enough, not the top issue, but there was more intensity around that issue. Yeah. And it's interesting, the degree to which the Trump factor becomes decoupled from economic concerns, the harder it will be for the Liberals.
Yeah, no, I get that. And Trump has become kind of an issue himself. It's Trump chaos. It's Trump crazy. It's whatever your view is of the president versus the specifics.
Yeah, and Mark Carney and the Liberals have gone all in on one issue, and it's really worked. I mean, if you look on who's best able to deal with Donald Trump, the difference in the United States, the difference between the Conservatives and Liberals is 65 points. It's enormous. There's only one person that people see being best able to deal with that. And if that's the ballot question, come April the 28th, then the Liberals are in a really strong position. What's happened is it started to come down in level of intensity.
Okay, now I'm going to ask for your knowledgeable opinions on things because you probably haven't done direct polling, but it would be reflected. 30 major business leaders, including all of the top bankers in this country, last week endorsed, at the end of the week, endorsed Pierre Poilievre. We had Stephen Harper saying, I've worked with both these guys. I pick Pierre Poilievre. When people say that, when there's those kinds of endorsements, does it matter?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So you saw Kamala Harris in the
Yeah,
United States had all of these endorsements, didn't mean a thing.
yeah,
And the only endorsements that seem to matter is when somebody does something that's surprising. So, for example, union leaders endorsing Pierre Poilievre,
right.
that's surprising. Big business people, because people still have this view of the Conservative Party as being the party of big business, but we know that's really the Liberal Party.
Yeah,
But they still, big business leaders supporting the Conservatives does not really do that much for them. It's the counterintuitive thing. Say, for example, a former Liberal premier comes out and supports Pierre Poilievre. Somebody who should be really close to Mark Carney and naturally be a Liberal coming out and supporting Pierre Poilievre, that's a surprise. If Stephen Harper had supported Mark Carney,
yeah,
that could have had an effect on the
yeah, that
campaign.
would have
If
changed.
Jean Chrétien comes in and supports Pierre Poilievre, that could potentially have an effect.
Yeah, those things aren't likely to happen. So
No,
but just the bankers endorsing the guy that's not the banker doesn't matter.
no.
Yeah. Okay. So I spend a lot of time in the last few days. I've been going through on X and looking at the two different worlds
And
there.
you survived. Wow.
And I survived. So there's a series of things that Mr. Carney is dealing with. The China factor, his closeness to key figures in China, pictures, evidence of same, questions, even a few about them. Lots of questions about Brookfield on everything from whether they're avoiding taxes by going to the Cayman Islands, and this is all reflecting on him. Um, the environmental issue, a lot of things. I just watched, it was an old bit, but someone had reposted it, which was Pierre Poilievre attacking Mark Carney during some committee hearings on the whole
Mhm.
question of pipelines. So a lot of things that were not positive, real questions about it. So again, I guess it's the same question. Are those things resonating anywhere, or is that just for the already committed? Does that just mean conservatives, hardcore conservatives, are saying, we told you about this guy, there's lots of problems?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of that, but the issue that, pardon me, the issue that the Liberals have with Mark Carney is he's an unknown. So he's now the prime minister. Nobody
Yeah,
knows anything about him. Everything that comes out, and you remember Kim Campbell,
yeah,
basically an unknown.
yeah.
Everything that comes out takes an inflated level of importance or plays an inflated level of importance in the minds of the public because they're trying to figure out who this person is. I don't think that there's any specific thing that could cause Mark Carney trouble. I could be wrong about that. But it's the accumulation of things that create the sense of maybe we don't know this guy as he's presenting himself. So that's the challenge for the Liberals. It's creating an image of who this person is as a potential prime and current prime minister for Canada that's positive and resonates with voters. And it's a blank space, and you have to get people to accept that. Or it's the other side where they're going to be throwing all of these things at him about the ones that you went through to say, well, that's kind of a fake presentation of Mark Carney. Here's the true Mark Carney. And the more contradictions that you have, the more conflicted people will be. And the thing about where we are on leadership, it's not that Pierre Poilievre has to be better than Mark Carney as prime minister, but they at least have to be equivalent. And they could get equivalent on best prime minister. On our polling, they're only 5 points apart. It's not huge. But it's their favorability numbers. So Mark Carney's favorability numbers are really negative numbers, are like 20%. Pierre Poilievre's are twice that. So if Pierre Poilievre can come down 10 and Mark Carney goes up 10 on that question of who do you really dislike, and they're even, then we move back to the agenda that existed prior to the election starting, which was really about cost of living, changing from the last 10 years, same old crowd, shouldn't have a fourth term, all of that kind of conversation. So that's what the battle is about right now. And you can talk about the parties, but it's really become personified by these two men.
Yeah. Let me just throw in, because I want to mention it on the list, which I just forgot, was Buttongate, right? Where we see these so-called dirty tricks where a CBC journalist overhears two Liberal campaign operatives saying, we snuck into the Conservative conference and placed all these buttons around, like that were very MAGA-ish sounding, stop the steal, and all of those things. And Mr. Carney's apologized and said it's not acceptable and all that kind of thing. But does it get at any of those things, the trust issue?
Again, it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be an accumulation of all of these little things that are going to fill in the blanks of who Mark Carney is and who this version of the Liberal Party is. So, is that a significant issue? By the way, I think conversations about war rooms are completely, and stunts and things are completely overrated. I think it's basically a lot of campaign people who want to be around a campaign, hanging out together in a particular place and drinking coffee and coming up with stuff that has no effect on the campaign. And then, of course, they end up on various political podcasts and shows and others as strategists, whatever that means these days. So there's a lot of keeping those guys busy. So that's what happens. And when you take your eyes off it and nobody's applying judgment to these things, then somebody does something like this. But is it fatal for the campaign? No.
So the other thing I listened to this weekend was an interview with Pierre Poilievre and his wife, Anna, with something called C-Suite with Camila Gonzalez. I hadn't seen, I think it was maybe the first edition, obviously. They had chosen this. Very open conversation on the part of the Poilievres about their two children. Mm-hmm. And the older girl, who is 6, she's nonverbal, and so whatever those issues are, more frank discussion about his own circumstances. He was being raised, adopted, the son of a young mother, etc. And I heard a lot of people, got a lot of feedback from people saying, wow, I didn't know that about him. The same thing you're saying about still defining. And then I heard the so-called strategists and the insiders say this is all just a mock-up, right? They just went and found a favorable guy or a woman, in this case, to do an interview so that they could find the softer side. So again,
you mean like Jon Stewart?
Yes. No, please. That was appalling.
No, but I'm saying that's not. I mean, they all do it. It's the question is, what's the effect? And Pierre Poilievre's problem is he comes across as not a particularly likable person.
Yeah.
And his negatives are 2 times. Strong negatives are 2 times what they are for Mark Carney. So turning him into more of a human being and making him seem like he's more empathetic character than he has come across in his entire political career is probably not a bad thing for the Conservatives to do. But it's pretty hard to rub off, 21 years of who he is. But like I said, he doesn't have to be the most empathetic. He doesn't have to be perceived to be absolutely the best. He just needs to be even. And if he can get to even, then the campaign changes. And particularly the campaign changes if the overall issue in the campaign moves back to what's happening in my 4 walls and to the people who I love and care about. If that's what the campaign is about, then the Conservatives have an advantage.
So does it matter? I mean, I also heard somebody over the weekend just say, I don't know whether Mark Carney's married. I don't know if he has kids. I don't care. I've decided he's the guy that's best to deal with this. People have decided that Pierre Poilievre is angry and he's the perpetual opposition leader,
Yeah.
just asking tough questions. So if people don't really care or are not open to having their mind changed, then that's not the issue anyway.
No, but they are. I mean, these are two relatively new actors in Canadian politics. Mark Carney being the newest, and this election right now is about leadership. So the more they can learn positive or negative about both of them, it has a disproportionate impact as opposed to saying I'm going to offer free passes to parks during the weekend. Or where you want to go. I mean, there are some people obviously that will appeal to, but they're really looking at the character of the people who are running for the leadership of this country. And all of this information has a cumulative effect. For Mark Carney, the cumulative effect will be bigger because there's less known of him.
Yeah, I see your point. So I read with interest a comment from James Moore, a guy we both know, former Conservative cabinet minister, always very, very thoughtful. And he said, I've always been of the view that when you decouple optimism from conservatism, then conservatism fails, meaning that Pierre Poilievre needs to keep that. Instead of Canada's broken, it's got to be, there's a great future ahead. It's hard to switch that.
Yeah, it really is. I was never a big fan of the Canada's broken positioning. I've always thought it was Canadians, because it implies that Canadians are broken, and they don't feel that way. But certainly they believe their institutions are broken. They believe their government's broken. They believe that, people who are supposed to be, working on behalf of the country aren't necessarily working as effectively as they should be, that things are not as good as they once were. But that doesn't mean that they believe that their country is broken or that Canadians are broken. It means that they believe that their institutions need to be rejuvenated. And that's where Pierre Poilievre, when he's talking about that, that's what makes sense. That's what cuts through with the public. Whereas when you're just standing up and providing a generic quote that, by the way, could have come from Donald Trump about America and did, that this doesn't really work for him. When you can do that ad in which you put Donald Trump on one side and Pierre Poilievre on the other side, and they're saying the same things, that's not good for Pierre Poilievre.
And the Liberals have been effectively been able to become the Captain Canada message or messengers.
No, I don't think so. Sorry, I don't mean to disagree.
No, please. That's why we're talking.
What the Liberals have tried to turn this into is a job interview for one task, which is to negotiate with the United States and protect our relationship with that country, which, by the way, is not a bad task. The two existential questions for every Canadian leader are: one, can you keep the country together? Two, can you make sure that we maintain our relationship with the United States? And then the third one is, can you make the economy work so we tend to prosper in the future? So it's just those three. Really, really leading strongly on one, like dealing with the United States, is a good place to be.
But the Mike Myers
unidimensional.
That
was so hokey. And let me tell you why. And it's the same thing with the Joe Canadian stuff. And, John Ibbotson and I wrote about this in The Big Shift. Yeah. This is a nostalgic Canada.
Yeah.
Two guys standing in hockey sweaters, looking uncomfortable, talking about the Canada that they grew up in the 1970s and
haven't lived in for a while.
It's not going to land.
But
it is going to land for older voters.
Yeah.
Who believe that this election is about protecting that. And by the way, if this election is about that, the Liberals are going to win. Yeah. But younger voters are not feeling that vibe. They may not even know who Mike Myers is. And he's, with his gray hair in particular, and talking about things that were, like I said, from their childhood in the 1970s. I mean, it's just like, that's.
But it did make that connection on the anti-51st state, the I will fight Trump, which is the flip side of I will manage the Canada-US relationship.
And if that's the issue, that's the issue that people are thinking about when they go into the ballot box on April the 28th, then the Liberals are going to have a very good night.
So have you seen any shift in that? Because the last time we talked, we were talking about the kind of the fear-driven boomers, the older people who are really wanting that, not only the nostalgia, but to preserve what they have, and that the Conservatives are appealing to a younger set, still a big gender divide, a regional divide, and this age divide. Has anything shifted in that in the last couple of weeks?
Well, I did mention, I think maybe I didn't on the podcast. I mean, the Conservative coalition is very well constructed. People are really committed.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
are, there's not enough of them.
yeah.
The Liberals coalition is put together with sealing wax, binding twine, staples, glue guns. People who wouldn't normally necessarily be voting together. So what's happened over the space of the last week is, as the Donald Trump issue has turned into more of a global issue rather than a specific Canada-US issue, things have started to soften. And as a result, other issues are coming onto the agenda. And we've seen cost of living move back up by 4 points, 5 points, and the Tories lead by that on that by 4. So if that comes into focus through the course of the rest of that campaign, you'll start to see parts of that Liberal coalition drift away and consider other things. So I know you had Alan Gregg on previously on your podcast. One of the things that I learned working from Alan is that it tends not to be people going from one party to the next party. They tend to go this party to undecided to their next choice. What's happened, in addition to the Tories moving up just a little bit, just 2 points, is we've seen more people who were previously voting Liberal go to the undecided category. So they're wavering.
What is that? I mean, that we always talk about
11%.
Confirmation bias, that if people think that the Liberals are winning, then they're going to win, and either they're going to stay home because they don't think it matters, or they're going to go out in a force and assure it. What happens with the polls and the voters in that process of maybe going from I'm committed to undecided to somewhere else?
Well, I don't think the polls are having an effect from people going to committed to undecided. I think that what's happened is their focus on what issue is the most important is changing a bit. Where the polls can have an effect, and we saw it back in the last election in 2021, where people who didn't want to vote for the Liberal Party, they wanted the Liberals defeated, but they looked at Erin O'Toole and the Conservatives and said, I don't think they're going to win. That kept them home, Conservative voters home, or they voted for the People's Party, which got 500,000 votes in the last election. So it was kind of like nobody above but the right-wing version of it. So that's how the polls can have an effect. They can have an effect on turnout for sure. They definitely affect, and we see this every day, how the campaigns are covered by journalists. So journalists say, I don't pay attention to polls. Baloney. That's why the first question is always, why are you ahead or why are you behind? Why is support not what you thought it was going to be? Again, well, they're getting that from the polling. I mean, so that's how polling has an effect. But I think what you're seeing right now is not not a reflection of the competitive abilities of the two political parties. I think the change is taking place because people's focus is moving on the issues.
Okay, two things in the last few days that have really shocked me. One was that Mark Carney is getting full-on credit for the carbon tax, for reducing the carbon tax. The Conservatives spent their life doing this, and it's not clear that he's actually killed the carbon tax. He's paused the carbon tax, so we can get into that. The other one is closer to home. Liberals showing in Saskatchewan some strengths, particularly in the cities. They often get the northern riding, but really some strength in the cities. This is and I mean significant. It's shocking. I just came back. I didn't talk to anybody who was voting.
Not really to me though. I mean, if you want to understand, I don't ever talk about the West. I talk about the Wests.
Yes, the Wests.
Because it's not really one region.
No,
they're very different. So when you've done election campaigns in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, you know how it works. Draw a circle around the city.
Yeah.
It's in Saskatchewan, it's around 2 cities.
Yeah.
And those 2 places, progressive voters can win.
Those and they cleaned up in the provincial election.
Yeah,
the NDP cleaned up in both.
So that can happen. I mean, Ralph Goodale won forever in Saskatchewan. And it's the same thing in Winnipeg. You have ridings that'll do that. In Alberta, Edmonton serves the same role. It's the government town. Government towns tend to be more progressive because that's the people who live there. so they could win seats there. And then you go to Vancouver, obviously the city of Vancouver, but also Victoria tends to be more progressive. So yes, the Liberals have turned that on. They're more competitive in those places than they were in previous election campaigns. They were very competitive in 2015 there. They won
Yeah.
seats.
Well, because that was a different,
Yeah.
does Mr. Carney really have that same kind of sunny ways appeal
No.
like that I think brought a lot of people out of the background?
Yeah, what you're seeing for Mark Carney is not a movement. I mean, I wrote an op-ed today that's on Global National's website, and I basically said, if we're being generous, it's low energy. If we're being honest, it's really not kind of just mailing it in. I mean,
Yeah.
how many days has he actually not been on the campaign trail? Every time he can possibly get back to Ottawa and perform the act of governing, which, by the way, is a good campaign strategy for him. I totally get it. Where he's now been obsessively focused on getting ready for the French language debate because he's really worried about that. The English language debate too. He's not doing a lot of public events. It's not sunny ways. Justin Trudeau would throw himself in any crowd. It was Canadians have become like a mosh pit. Through the course of that election campaign. And Mark Carney, when you put him in, say, a strip mall in Saskatoon, as I said in the actually it was Timmins in the piece that I wrote. It's like he comes in like an alien who just parked his spaceship outside. I mean, it's just not his thing. I mean, he's got a lot of great qualities. I mean, he's very admired internationally. He's obviously a very seasoned, very professional a negotiator and not political leader, but a person who understands public policy and all that kind of thing. There's no doubting all of that. But in terms of a common touch, that's not him.
Yeah.
So it's not 2015 at all.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
Yes,
I
right.
understand why he goes back to Ottawa to be prime minister for a day, but and doesn't take questions. I do get that side of it, but it is to me there's something. I keep coming at it a different way. He's not a good campaigner. He doesn't connect with people. He's awkward in front of even Liberal supporters. Yet the favorability numbers are so high, even when people know nothing about him, they don't know his position on the environment. He's going to keep Bill 63. There's all these things that are inconsistent. They don't seem to care whether he's a good campaigner, whether he's going to do what he says. But there's just this favorability. So it's a whole other phenomenon.
He looks the part.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. It's a visual vibe. He looks the part. They hear a little bit about their pedigree, and they say, "Oh yeah, a guy who's done that looks like that." If we're in an emergency situation, almost like a wartime footing, and these are Mark Carney's words himself. In that kind of a situation, in the bar, I forget where it was, in Barrie or someplace, saying, this is a Churchill-like moment, and I'm a person who's built for that. Okay, well, if that's the job, if you're interviewing somebody to do that, then he's in a really strong position. If that's not what is driving the campaign, and this over the space of the last week, it's been less that, then they struggle. They've got a unidimensional position that they've taken. They've found this one thing that they can really work on, that they can push the last 10 years away from, move people into the here and now, and contrast really well for the person that they picked against their single biggest opponent. But if it's not about that, it's a lot tougher.
But given that, what you've just said, which I agree with totally, then that actually puts him in the driver's seat on debate nights. Even though his French may not be good, even though Pierre Poilievre has spent his life sort of grilling people and in that debate format in the House of Commons, because there's 5 people on the stage, because it's so formatted, it doesn't matter what the question is, as long as Mark Carney simply answers, I'm the guy that should be in charge in troubled times.
Well, I'm sure what's happening at the moment is they're desperately trying to find a way for him not to look anxious.
Yeah. Just that uncomfortableness.
Yeah, and you can see it when he gets asked questions that he doesn't like. I mean, no secret. I mean, he does what any human being would do. He gets defensive. But particularly someone who feels that he is that once in a lifetime individual who's perfectly created for this moment. It's like, how can you not see it the way that I see it? And why would anybody question any of this? I'm going to get angry
Yeah.
that you're even making these kinds of challenges. Who are you to do this? The more he does that, the worse it is.
Yeah, because that's the problem when he gets angry with the media, is that nobody loves the media, but what they see is an angry defensive guy saying it's none of your business, what my conflicts of interest may or may not be, when in fact it
Well,
is everybody's business, right?
yeah, but regardless of the topic, and I agree with you, it's going to be a tough question. But regardless of the topic, it's this idea that how dare you?
Yeah,
It doesn't come across well. And I think his challenge during the course of these two debates, because he's a guy who's used to sitting in boardrooms, doing the hand steeple, sitting on panels where everybody claps and says, "Oh,
yeah,
you're so smart," and in front of audiences, his contact with the public was probably before this mostly at book signings and things like that. People who are in his thrall.
yeah,
When he gets together with people who say, "I actually don't like you. I disagree with you. I really wonder who you are, and I'm going to ask you some tough questions," how he deals with that. And if he is able to keep his calm and act like somebody who is able to take all of this in stride easily and be authentic and genuine in the way that he does it and doesn't get flustered, he could have a very good couple of debate nights. But doing it in your second official language, when he's got Yves Blanchette and Pierre Poilievre and the leader of the Green Party all coming at him in languages that they're much more comfortable in, along with a moderator, it's going to be interesting to see if he keeps his cool.
and then
Same thing in English too,
yeah,
although it'll be more comfortable. But Pierre Poilievre is, he's made in a lab somewhere to be an elite killer and to go after guys like this.
yeah.
And, Jagmeet Singh, it's the only chance he's got to get back into this too. So he's going to be going after him. So he's going to be under pressure like nobody else on that stage. And it's going to be really interesting to see in that environment how he holds up.
So Pierre Poilievre, who's being told endlessly by people inside his party and out that he's got to change his strategy and have a different campaign and be nicer and find that optimistic note when he's by nature the prosecutor, right? That's what does he just do that? He just keeps doing that because his job is to put a chink in Mr. Carney's armor.
Well, he has to realize that he's not the only one who can do it, that there's other people on the stage that'll help.
Yeah.
And give them the space to be able to do it. Because it doesn't matter if he does it or if the other people do it, as long as it happens.
Yeah.
But I think, you quoted James Moore before.
Yeah.
Some very good advice.
Yeah. Find a bit of that optimistic note if you possibly can. What a week it's going to be. Be very interesting. And so we'll talk again next week as we head into the final stretch and see what's there. Darrell, always great to get your insights. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Senator.
Okay, we'll talk soon. We'll talk with you very soon. We've got another pod coming up this week. We're going to take a little bit of a look at the media and their role and how that's playing, and always with the insight that Darrell offers us. Darrell Bricker, Ipsos polling firm. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. And we'll see you again very soon.